There is a version of you at the end of narcissistic abuse that nobody warns you about, and it is not the version you think you're heading toward. You think you're heading toward peace. You think you're heading toward the day you wake up and just don't feel it anymore. But I need you to sit with something uncomfortable for a second. The final stage of the empath after narcissistic abuse is not healing. It's not forgiveness. It's not even closure. It's something far colder and far more common than anyone in this space is willing to admit out loud. It's the stage where the empath, the person who used to feel everything, who used to cry at other people's pain, who used to give without being asked, becomes someone who feels almost nothing at all. And here's the part that's going to sting. You've probably already started noticing it in yourself, and you've been calling it growth. You've been telling yourself, I'm just protecting my peace now. I don't let people in as easily. I've just gotten wiser. But wisdom doesn't feel like a wall going up brick by brick around your chest. Wisdom doesn't feel like watching someone cry and thinking, that's not my problem anymore, and feeling almost proud of yourself for thinking it. That's not wisdom. That's the final stage. And it's the one nobody talks about because it looks so much like healing from the outside that even the empath themselves can't tell the difference. Think about the person you were before them, before the narcissist, before the love bombing, before the slow erosion of your sense of self that happened so gradually you couldn't even mark the day it started. You were the friend everyone called first. You were the one who noticed when someone at the table went quiet. You were the one who forgave too fast, loved too hard, gave too much. And somewhere along the way, someone took that softness and used it as a weapon against you. And now you flinch when someone tells you they need something from you. Now you calculate the cost of caring before you let yourself care. Now you watch yourself from a distance sometimes, almost like you're narrating your own life instead of living it, because staying numb feels safer than ever being that open again. That right there, that quiet, invisible shift from feeling everything to feeling almost nothing. That's what I want to talk about today, because I don't think you fully understand yet how far this stage can go if you don't catch it. And by the end of this, you're going to recognize exactly where you are in it. And more importantly, you're going to understand why this stage, if left alone, doesn't lead you back to yourself. It leads you somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that might actually scare you. Let's back up for a second, because to understand how you got to this final stage, you have to understand the road that got you here. And I promise you, you're going to recognize every mile marker on this trip. It starts with hyper empathy, the thing that made you a target in the first place, if we're being honest. You were the person who could read a room in 3 seconds. You knew when your partner's mood shifted before they even said a word. You could sense tension in a text message that hadn't even been sent with any tension in it at all. And somehow you were usually right. That sensitivity, that radar, it's not a flaw, it's actually a gift. But a narcissist doesn't see it as a gift. A narcissist sees it as a resource. And slowly, without you ever agreeing to it, your empathy got repurposed into a job, managing their moods, predicting their reactions, softening every blow before it landed, apologizing for things you didn't do just to keep the peace. This is the fawning stage. And if you've been in this world for a while, you already know the term. But here's what people don't say enough. Fawning isn't just people pleasing. Fawning is a trauma response. It's your nervous system deciding that the safest way to survive a threat is to become smaller, more agreeable, more invisible in your own needs, because every time you asserted yourself, there was a cost. Maybe it was the silent treatment. Maybe it was the sarcastic comment that cut you in front of people. Maybe it was them turning the whole argument around until somehow you were the one apologizing for their behavior. So you adapted. You got good at it. You got so good at reading them that you stopped reading yourself. And this is where most people think the story ends, with the empath finally leaving, finally seeing the truth, finally getting some distance. That's the story we love to tell because it has a clean ending. But it's not the real ending. And if you're being honest with yourself right now, you know it's not. Because leaving didn't fix the thing underneath. Leaving didn't undo years of your nervous system being trained to expect punishment for having needs. You can leave the person and still be living inside the relationship, inside your own head, replaying it, defending against it, bracing for a version of them that isn't even in the room anymore. And that bracing, that permanent, exhausting bracing, is what quietly morphs into the final stage. Because your body doesn't know the danger is over. It only knows it can't afford to be caught off guard again. And so it does what any survival system does when it's been burned enough times. It shuts the door, not gently, not selectively, all the way. So here's where it gets uncomfortable, because I need you to really hear this part instead of just nodding along like you already know it. The final stage of the empath isn't a breakdown. It's not crying on the bathroom floor at 2 a.m., even though that stage is real and it happens too. The final stage is quieter than that, and honestly, it's scarier because it doesn't look like pain from the outside. It looks like control. It looks like someone who has finally figured it out. You stop reacting. You stop explaining yourself. You stop crying when people disappoint you. And everyone around you, your friends, your therapist maybe, even you, starts calling this progress. Look how far you've come. You used to fall apart over things like this, and now you barely blink. But I want you to ask yourself something honestly. Is that peace, or is that just a more sophisticated form of the same wall you've always built when you got hurt? Because there's a version of moving on that comes from actual resolution, where you've processed the grief, you've grieved the relationship and the person you thought they were, and you've come out the other side with your empathy intact, but your boundaries finally in place. And then there's this other version, the one I'm talking about right now, where you haven't actually processed anything. You've just gone numb, and numbness got mistaken for strength because numbness doesn't hurt as loud. This is the part where the empath starts grieving something they don't even have language for yet. Not the narcissist, not the relationship, but themselves. The self they used to be, the person who used to answer the phone without checking who it was first. The person who used to say, I love you, without doing a cost-benefit analysis in their head first. The person who used to believe, fundamentally, that most people were safe until proven otherwise, instead of the other way around. That person is gone, and what's standing in their place is someone who survived, yes, but who is also quietly mourning a version of themselves they're not sure they'll ever get back. And this grief is sneaky because it doesn't come with tears most of the time. It comes with a strange flatness, a sense of watching your own life instead of participating in it. People will tell you at least you're not with them anymore, and you'll nod because that's true. That part is genuinely good. But nobody prepares you for the fact that leaving the narcissist doesn't automatically give you back the parts of yourself the relationship took. Those parts don't just return because the threat is gone. Sometimes they stay hidden for years. And what fills the space instead is exactly what I'm about to describe to you next. And this is the part where I need you to really pay attention, because this is the part that determines whether you heal or whether you just become a different kind of guarded for the rest of your life. Let's talk about what this final stage actually looks like, day to day, because I think when we speak in abstractions, people miss it in their own lives. It looks like hypervigilance wearing the costume of boundaries. You tell yourself you've learned to protect your energy. But what's actually happening is you're scanning every new person you meet for red flags before you've even given them a chance to show you who they are. You meet someone kind, someone consistent, Someone who texts back when they say they will, and instead of relief, you feel suspicion. Your brain says, "This is too easy, something's wrong." Because your nervous system was trained in a relationship where kindness always had a catch, where consistency was rare enough that when it happened, it was usually love bombing, which means now your body treats genuine safety the exact same way it treats danger. It looks like isolation dressed up as independence. You start telling people and yourself that you just prefer being alone now, that you don't need as many people in your life, that you've realized most relationships aren't worth the energy. And some of that might even be partially true. Some relationships in your life probably were one-sided, and it's fair to release them. But underneath that story, if you're honest, there's often something rawer. A fear that if you let someone in close enough to actually matter, you'll be handing them the same blueprint you handed the narcissist, and they'll use it exactly the same way. So it feels safer to just not hand it out at all. It looks like emotional flatness that gets mistaken for maturity. You watch a movie that used to make you cry, and now you just watch it. Someone shares good news with you, and you say the right words, but you don't feel the thing you used to feel, that instant physical joy for someone else's happiness. And this scares people more than they admit. Because if you were an empath your whole life, feeling deeply was part of your identity. It was proof to yourself that you were a good person, a caring person, a person worth loving. So when that feeling goes quiet, some part of you starts to panic underneath the surface. Even while another part of you insists this numbness is exactly what you needed all along. It looks like cynicism creeping into places it never used to live. You catch yourself assuming the worst about people's motives, assuming everyone wants something from you, assuming that vulnerability is just a setup for the next betrayal. And here's the part I really need you to sit with, because it's the part that makes this stage genuinely dangerous. Not just uncomfortable, this is the exact soil that narcissistic traits can grow in. Not narcissistic personality disorder, that's not what I'm saying, but the defenses, the self-focus, the difficulty empathizing with people who haven't earned it yet, the tendency to keep people at arm's length and call it self-respect. When an empath stays in this final stage too long, they don't become the narcissist who hurt them, but they can absolutely start borrowing some of their armor. And that should terrify you a little, because it terrified me the first time I saw it clearly in a client. Now, here's the part of this conversation that most content in this space skips entirely, and it's the part that I think is actually the most important thing I'll say today. There is a real and specific danger in mistaking this frozen, guarded, hyper-vigilant state for healing, because if you believe you've already arrived, you stop doing the work that would actually get you to the other side. You settle into the numbness like it's a finish line instead of recognizing it as a checkpoint, a necessary one, even a protective one for a while, but not the destination. And I want to be really clear about something, because I don't want you walking away from this thinking I'm telling you that your guardedness is a character flaw. It's not. It is a completely logical response to what happened to you. Your nervous system did exactly what it was supposed to do. It learned from repeated harm, and it adapted to protect you from more of it. That's not weakness, that's biology doing its job. The problem isn't that this stage exists. The problem is when it becomes permanent, when it hardens into identity instead of passing through as a phase. When "I'm protecting my peace" quietly becomes "I don't know how to let anyone close anymore, and I've stopped trying." Because here's the thing about walls, they don't just keep the narcissists out, they keep everyone out. The genuinely safe people, the ones who would never do to you what was done to you, they hit that same wall, and unlike the narcissist, they don't push through it, they don't manipulate their way past your defenses, because that's not who they are. They just quietly back away, because that's what healthy people do when they sense someone isn't ready to be close. And so the tragic irony of this final stage is that it ends up filtering out exactly the kind of people who could help you heal while doing almost nothing to stop a sophisticated narcissist who was never deterred by your walls in the first place. Remember, they got past them once already, and a determined one can usually find a way to get past them again because manipulation doesn't respect boundaries. It just learns to route around them. So you end up in this strange, lonely paradox, too guarded for the good ones, still somehow vulnerable to the bad ones, and mistaking the resulting isolation for strength. I've watched this happen to people who did everything right after their abuse. They read the books, they went to therapy, they cut contact, they educated themselves on every term: narcissism, gaslighting, love bombing, hoovering. They could recite it all back to me fluently. And yet, years later, they were still alone in this frozen stage, still calling it healing, still not able to tell me the last time they let someone see them cry. That's not a failure of effort. That's what happens when nobody tells you that this stage exists and that it requires its own separate kind of work to move through, work that's different from the work of leaving and different from the work of understanding what happened to you. So, what actually moves you out of this stage? Because I'm not going to leave you sitting in that discomfort without a path forward. That's not what I do here. The first thing, and I say this to every client who reaches this point, is you have to stop treating numbness as the goal and start treating it as information. When you notice yourself going flat around someone who's being kind to you, that flatness is not a character trait, it's data. It's telling you exactly where the old wound still lives. Instead of pushing that feeling away or being proud of how unbothered you are, get curious about it. Ask yourself, what would it cost me right now to let this feel good instead of suspicious? What am I actually afraid will happen if I let this person's kindness be real? Most of the time, underneath that fear, you'll find the actual belief that's been running the show since the relationship. Something like, if I open up, I'll be punished for it again. And once you can see that belief in plain language, instead of feeling it as vague dread, you can actually start challenging it. Because beliefs formed in a specific abusive relationship are not universal truths about the whole world, even though your body is currently treating them that way. The second thing is you have to practice re-entry in small doses, not all at once. You don't rebuild trust in humanity by throwing yourself into a new relationship and hoping for the best. That's often how people end up right back in another harmful dynamic because they swing from hypervigilance straight into recklessness, skipping the middle step entirely. The middle step is small, low-stakes vulnerability. Telling a friend something slightly more honest than you normally would. Letting someone help you with something small instead of insisting you're fine. Noticing when someone treats you consistently over weeks, not days, and instead of dismissing it, actually logging it as evidence. Real evidence, the kind that slowly retrains a nervous system that's been burned. The third thing, and this is the one people resist the most, is you have to actually grieve. Not the narcissist, you don't owe them your grief. And I want to be blunt about that. You grieve the version of yourself that existed before them. You sit with the loss of that softness, that trust, that ease you used to carry into the world. And you let yourself be sad about it instead of just being impressed with how tough you've become instead. Because grief, real grief, is actually one of the most empathetic things you can do for yourself. And it's the thing that finally lets the flatness crack open into something real again, instead of staying frozen as a permanent personality trait you never chose. This is slow work. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But it is absolutely reversible, and I have watched people do it and become fully themselves again, not the naive version from before, but a wiser, more discerning version who can steal deeply and still trust selectively, which is actually the healthiest place any of us can land. Here's what I want you to walk away with today, because I think it's more important than anything I've already said. This final stage, the numbness, the hypervigilance, the flatness you've maybe been quietly proud of, it is not the end of your story. Even though right now it might feel like the safest place you've ever stood, it's a checkpoint your nervous system built to keep you alive, and it did its job. And you should honestly thank it for that, because without it, you might not have made it out at all. But a checkpoint is not a home. You are not meant to live there forever, standing guard over a version of yourself that's still bracing for a war that already ended. The empath who used to exist inside you, the one who cried too easily and loved too openly and believed in people maybe a little too fast, she's not gone forever. She's just waiting for you to prove slowly and carefully that it's safe to come back out. And that proof doesn't come from the world all at once. It comes one honest conversation at a time, one small risk at a time, one moment where you let yourself feel something instead of managing it into silence. I want you to think right now about the last time you actually let yourself cry over something that mattered instead of pushing it down and calling yourself strong for doing it. If you can't remember, that's not a failure, that's just information. And now you know exactly where to start, because the goal was never to become someone who feels nothing. The goal was always to become someone who feels everything again, but this time with the wisdom to know exactly who deserves to witness it. That's the real final stage, the one after this one, the one almost nobody talks about, because so few people make it that far. And if today's video hit a little too close to home, I want you to sit with that discomfort instead of scrolling past it. Because that discomfort is the first honest thing you've felt in a while, and that alone tells you something important. But there's something else I haven't told you yet, something about how narcissists specifically target people in this exact frozen stage, how they can smell that hypervigilance from a mile away and use it against you in ways that are almost the opposite of what you'd expect. And that's exactly what we're getting into in the next part. So don't go anywhere, because what I'm about to show you is going to change the way you see every safe relationship you've had since the last one.